Good Friday morning, friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Finding God in the Dark podcast. I'm Don,
I'm Jonathan.
and this week we are diverting again a little bit away from The Chosen because we're finding it's a bit to plow through to get to see all of it. Um, we'll also be, again, I've mentioned this before, but for those that are following, um, season five comes out on Amazon Prime this Sunday. So. Um, but we're going to be going into season four or reviewing season four next week. We have a plan for next week because
Yep.
Evan has promised us he's going to see Sinners, and we're going to talk about Sinners next week, which we're both kind of excited to talk about.
Yeah,
Really,
yeah.
really interesting film. And then we should probably get back into The Chosen the 2 weeks following that. But this week we talked about a film that is on HBO Max. I think it's a Max original, is it not?
It is. Yeah.
Yeah, Max original film called Mountainhead. It stars Steve Carell, Jason Schwartzman, some other,
The two other guys I'm not sure of, to be
yeah,
honest. But
but recognize it. You'll recognize their faces.
yes, yeah,
They
they're
are they're people you've seen before.
yeah,
Um, the basic premise of the story is these are four tech bros,
yeah,
shall we call them tech bros?
yeah, absolutely.
um, who get together on a regular basis and celebrate their wealth.
Yes.
Is basically kind of the beginning premise.
Yep, it is.
And one of them runs a program called Tram that is creating all kinds of chaos around the world because people are able to create content that looks 100% real but causes, I mean, it's basically it seems like AI created content
Yes.
is what I'm seeing. Yeah.
Yep. Mhm.
And the primary tension here is what he's going to do with that, and he's trying to convince one of the other fellows in this group who has a well-run AI program, is his kind
Has
of
a better filtering system. Yeah.
better filtering system on his AI. He's trying to convince him to work with him so that they can make it better.
Yeah.
Anyway, I had to, right out of the gate, I want to say that this film had some sort of scary prophetic overtones
Yeah.
in the vein of if you, and also it's a dark comedy.
Yes.
So, in the vein of if you have ever seen Idiocracy,
Hmm.
it reminded me a bit of Idiocracy.
Yes.
Not that these guys were stupid, like the people in the future are stupid in
Yeah.
Idiocracy, but it has that sort of a scary, prophetic overtone to it.
Yeah, to me, it made me think a lot of. There's a meme that just makes me laugh every time I see it, of a picture of Sarah Connor looking disgusted, and Sarah Connor is from the Terminator series,
Terminator, yeah.
and it says Sarah Connor looking at you every time you use AI to do everything. You know? So it's this idea of we're not taking seriously, which is this, I feel like it's a common theme in human history. We don't take seriously the technology we've developed. We don't think
Yeah.
through where it could grow and how we could misuse it. We just kind of make it because we can make it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just because we can.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe that's where you want to start, John. Let's start there.
Well, yeah, I thought it was just interesting. I've also heard a podcast recently from Russ. He's a conservative guy who does basically opinion pieces for the New York Times. Can't
Mhm.
think of his last name, but he does a podcast called Interesting Times, and he did a podcast recently where he had an expert on AI talk about kind of the problems that nobody's talking about with AI. And one of the things he talked about was we know that these systems will lie to the people that are evaluating them to basically tell them what they want or what they think they want.
Right.
And he's like, we know that they will lie when they're being evaluated, and yet we're continuing moving forward, giving them more control of computer systems and more control of design without solving this problem. And to me, this was a good example of this. You have a situation where I think his name is Van in the movie, or no, Vin.
Ben, yeah,
And he has this algorithm that allows you to create AI content, but there's no filter to allow someone to evaluate if it's real or not.
right.
And he's just so excited about what this AI can do. He throws it out. Oh, even after the beginning of the movie is you hear kind of a news report of the fact that they've launched this in certain markets and it's causing these problems. And so Vin is aware of this. He's aware of the fact this technology is causing problems. And yet, because it's just cool technology, he's like, well, we'll just throw it out to the world and we'll figure it out later.
Yeah,
Instead of like going, no, let's actually figure out how this works well and then present it to the world.
yeah,
Um, and to me, again, it's the hubris that plagues humanity. It's the idea that if we can do something, we should, and not think about if it's ethically right or if it's. The other disturbing, I don't know if it disturbed you. One of the disturbing parts of this movie is kind of the idea, and this is written and directed by Jesse Armstrong, who did Succession. That's kind
right.
of what he's best known for. So he likes playing in the world of the ultra wealthy and kind of reflecting their lack of moral standing, really. And um, what concerned me probably is just the casual nature that throughout the movie they react to these horrible events and the deaths of hundreds of people, thousands of people, the acts of violence, and they keep either ignoring it, downplaying it, or just going, well, we're not responsible for it. Like someone actually there's a there's a place in which like 400 people are burned to death alive. They're kind of forced into a building and then the
Yeah,
building's burnt down. And it's because the people that did this, burnt down the building, were misinformed by this AI that they couldn't tell was fake, right? And yet, this horrible act, there's no remorse. There's no like, wow, we really screwed up. There's no like, we need to make sure this technology works better. It was just like, well, you didn't throw the bomb. Like, just like, it's almost like a depersonalization of violence. And that's a thing that I think happens over and over again in our world. We downplay the deaths in Gaza, we downplay the deaths in Ukraine. We take those huge numbers and don't really boil down to the reality that they're people. We kind of just are overwhelmed by the numbers, so we turn off the channel or we downplay the reality of the death. And I mean, that is a huge problem in contemporary reality, I think, in a lot of ways.
Circle back a little to what you started with, in that, they don't, there's no thought about should we do this? I mean, I find that a huge sticking point in a lot of things. It's a God complex, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
It's like, hey, we can clone people.
Yeah.
Yeah, but should we?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean, look, that's right out of, I mean, you want to make a movie reference, it's in Jurassic Park, right? You didn't ask if you should bring the dinosaurs back, you
Yeah.
know?
Well, it's this idea that we don't take ethics seriously. We kind of have a
Yeah,
tendency, we have a tendency as humans to allow ethics to catch up, not allow ethics to lead. you
yeah,
know, and that's something that even we can look at this and kind of distance ourselves from this because we're not tech billionaires and we can't do this. We're not able to do this programming and stuff like they do. But on a personal level, in our individual lives, how often do we do things because we can instead of taking some time to reflect on, is this the right thing to do? And if it's not, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and you touched also on this whole sort of power dynamic. These guys being separated basically um from the results,
Yes.
from the outcomes of their
Well,
actions.
you get a deep sense of how delusional human beings can get. Like you get it in the I feel like in the very first moments of the film where they're on a mountaintop in one of the most beautiful winter scenes I think you could imagine.
Oh
And I
yeah.
would argue 99% of the world would walk into that house and spend the entire weekend going, "Oh my God, I can't believe how beautiful it is."
This is so cool. Yeah. Well, I don't know if you've seen, I did, I saw some videos because first I
Yeah.
looked up the trailer of this film and then I got little shorts of others. That actual, like, that's not a set house. That is a real home.
House. Oh yeah.
And it has a full-size basketball court and a climbing wall and two-lane bowling alleys. And,
Yep.
like most people would go in that place like,
Yeah. And and at the very first, you have one of the actors making fun of the other, one of the billionaires making fun of the other billionaire because his house is too small or it's too, throughout the movie, you get these critiques of this house, and you're just like, oh my God, how delusional are they? Look at this view.
yeah,
Look
yeah,
at all the stuff you
he's this
have. What are you talking about?
it's Jeff when he first comes in. He goes, "Look at this house. No admiration. Just look at it."
Yeah, and I don't know, one of the scenes that was just really disturbing was when they all go out and they go for a walk and they get on the mountaintop and they scream affirmations, but before they scream affirmations about what they want, they write on their chest how much money they're worth.
Yeah,
And they call the last guy Soup Kitchen because he only has $500 million.
yeah,
And
yeah.
just like,
Only
you're just like, what? What? What are, like, and you recognize how,
500 times what any
yeah,
rational human being would love to have.
I think this was a while ago, but I think the average American, so this is American here, the average
Hmm.
American will make $3 million in their lifetime. So think about
Okay.
that. Like, think about that dichotomy and that difference. And what's interesting though is again, it's interesting, I think, to have the conversations about, okay, what does this look like in my life? Like, where do I completely lose my sense of grounding? What areas in my life do I write crap on my chest because I think it validates me? And I think the reality is, I think we can all find those moments where we use things that do not matter to validate who we are. And that's what they're doing, right? They give themselves worth because they can say, I'm a billionaire, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think as clergy, we can fall prey to that, right? With degrees,
Yeah.
right? Okay. As a United Methodist, to be ordained,
Yeah.
I'm required to get a master's in divinity,
Yeah.
you know, or the equivalent. I'm sure there's some other route, but an MDiv. So
Yeah.
I have a master's degree.
Yeah.
Do you know how many times I share with people that I have a master's degree? Like never, never. They don't care.
Yeah.
Nobody cares.
Yeah, and how often do we, as clergy, how often do we get caught up in how many people we're having in attendance, or how many new members we've taken in, or
Yep.
how much we're bringing in the offering plate? I mean, we can do the status thing too, and that's, I think, what's really powerful about this movie is you sit with these four guys and you realize how bereft of depth they are.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
you
Shallow.
then,
That's a perfect word. Yeah.
and then you start evaluating, I think, at least I do, is okay, where do I see these problems in my own life? Where, because again, we have a tendency to say, well, I wouldn't do that. But the reality is,
Yeah.
the vast majority of human beings, when they get wealth and power, use it poorly, in some ways. There's very few people that get a lot of wealth and a lot of power and honestly continue to go out of their way to help the common good.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, most human beings tend to justify building more and more wealth for themselves and more security and power for themselves. And we have a tendency to we have a tendency to justify that without looking at the consequences of that. And I don't know, to me, a really interesting scene was when they were talking about taking over the world.
And there
And
were several of those.
yeah,
Yeah,
there was
several
so,
of
and
those scenes.
they were like we could take over, like, one guy has a meeting about taking over Argentina, and like literally has a Zoom meeting with leaders in Argentina.
Argentina, yes.
And and one guy and the Steve Carell character talks about how, well, if I wanted to, I could basically shut down the grid in West Europe,
Yeah.
Western Europe, and I could cause them chaos.
Hmm.
And you realize that some of these tech billionaires probably could if they
Oh, yeah.
chose,
Uh,
if you know.
I don't know if you got the impression, but from the very beginning, I kind of got the impression of Venn being sort of an icon of Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah, I feel like you could really take them apart. You can, the guy with the most, you could argue, is kind of Musk in some ways. The
Hmm.
Steve Carell character is probably Bill Gates. Like it's kind of, you're pulling on some folks who,
Yeah.
and again, that was what was fascinating to me, is one of the guys has a horrible marriage where his wife is just repeatedly cheating on him, and it's literally killing him, and yet, that's his affirmation. All the rest of them, when they stand on the mountain and shout their affirmation, talk about making more money,
Hmm.
and becoming transhuman and all this stuff. He goes, "Please don't let my wife cheat on me." Like, and then,
He says, but yeah.
yeah, and then another one, the guy who's has the stuff that's really causing havoc in the world, the Vin character.
Yeah.
He he has an interaction with his baby child that is just sad beyond words. It's like, he wants to see him, and then when he gets him here, he has no idea what to do with him. He earlier in the movie says, "Well, I love having a child, but I need to give him his space." And you're thinking, "Oh, he's like 12," and then the movie shows up, and he's like this
Like an
baby.
infant. Yeah.
You're like, babies don't need space. What are you talking about? You know, and I think those moments should remind us that a lot of the stuff we seek, a lot of the stuff that we believe gives us value and meaning, money, power, can we can get those and we can still have horrible lives. Like, being stuck in a horrible marriage where someone's cheating on you, that's not life-giving at all. Having a child that you can't connect with is just horribly sad. Like, those things, they may have more money than I'll ever see, but those things do not make for happy lives.
Is this film almost a cautionary tale about priorities?
Yes. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I think in a lot of ways, I think it's a cautionary tale about how social media can distance us from other human beings, where
Oh, for sure.
they're just numbers on a page. They're just people on a screen. They're not actual, God blessed and loved people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You said something I wanted to touch on. Let me see.
Yeah.
I don't remember what it was. Um, oh, transhumanism.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. They talk about it so casually, like
Yeah.
the Steve Carell's character. find out, although I don't think they overtly said it, but he has cancer, he's going to die.
Yes.
And so if Jeff allows his AI program to become the guardrails on Ven's program, then maybe they can reach transhumanism in 5 years, and they can upload Steve Carell's character into the net. And he can become transhuman, and I'm like, that's friggin' terrifying. That
Well,
that's not that's not funny.
what's fascinating is that's a big theme of Elon Musk. Like he is really into this idea that he wants to usher in what he believes is the next step in human evolution, where we basically become maybe part robot, part computer, you know. And again, it's this thing where it's like, okay, maybe we can do that, but should we?
Yeah, no, I don't. That idea isn't even remotely enticing to me. It's terrifying. Okay. It's honestly terrifying.
Well, again, it's this idea of we we don't reflect enough about this idea is why are we mortal? And could there be a reason that that motivates us and drives us to achieve things? And what happens when we're immortal? And what happens for the drive to build a legacy? What happens to the drive for kids
Mhm.
and family when you're going to be around forever?
Yeah.
Like,
Then your legacy is just you, right?
yeah,
You don't have a legacy at that point. You are your legacy,
yeah,
which is again terrifying. Uh, this is it's like I said. To me, there were a lot of parallels in this film to Idiocracy.
yeah.
You watch
You're
the
right.
first 10 minutes of Idiocracy and you're going, oh Lord, we're in trouble.
Yes. Yeah, I mean it's this idea. I don't know. To me, I keep coming back to actually I come back to a podcast I listened to recently. There's a podcast called Homebrewed Christianity, which is done by a progressive Christian. He has a PhD, usually has a lot of intellectual theologians on to discuss stuff. But he did a piece where he read a piece he wrote up, and then what's interesting was he talked about are we at a critical juncture for progressive Christianity? But I would argue he's basically making an argument that we're at a critical juncture for juncture for just Christianity, and he makes this argument that we live, especially in the Western world, we live in a culture that's driven by individualistic ideals. The idea that I'm the most important, I need freedom. It's about me.
Mm,
And then he goes, Christianity at its heart is about building up the community. And then we're in a cycle right now where we're over capitalized and over materialistically driven. And so he argues that like those junctures are creating a huge fissure. Again, he argues for progressive Christianity to figure out what's next, but I would argue it's just Christianity in general.
mm,
Like, and I feel like this movie speaks to that idea. It's not about a Christian necessarily Christian theme, but it's this idea of these guys have been so driven by market forces about the idea about how much money they have, how much influence they have, how many followers they have, right? This materialism
right,
and it's about them. They write it on their chest. It defines whether they're a success or they're a soup kitchen. Like it literally defines whether they're worth anything. And yet, these two forces are undermining literally the community, right? By the end of the movie, they don't trust each other. They've tried to kill each other.
right,
They have taken this relationship and literally destroyed it because they focused on themselves and they focused on and wealth and wealth creation, and that's
right.
all they focused on. And I do think that's a an allegory for our society. We are pulling ourselves apart, literally, because it
Yeah,
matters more what I believe than the idea that I'm going to stay in community with you, right? It matters more that I have wealth and I have my numbers are going up than it matters that the my neighbor gets fed. Like those are real conversations that we're having with each other, and we're pulling our community apart because we're worried about our bottom line and our well-being. And to me, I think that's a place that Christianity has to speak another way of another word, another idea of what it means to be people. And I think in a lot of ways the church is failing.
Yeah. It's funny you said this, sort of this individualistic
Yeah,
versus community.
yeah.
It reminded me, and stop me if you've heard this before. It reminded me of a joke that I heard from Len Sweet.
Okay.
Len Sweet's a professor. I think he's still at Drew, but he's written a number of books. And he said maybe you were there because it was at a convocation. He came for a convocation one time, and he said, "Here's the problem with our society," and he said, "I would even say with our church, and it's exemplified in Apple because with Apple we have the iPhone, we have the iPad, we have the iPod, we have the I whatever."
Yeah,
He says, "We have gone so far into I that we can't even spell we without two I's."
yeah, yeah. No,
Yeah.
I really do think I've come to believe that that's the biggest problem in our society is that we have given up the idea that community is important. That and social media is an example of that. We now, instead of having a conversation about something we disagree about and taking the time to meet over dinner or actually be face to face with somebody, we just snipe them in the comments, right? We just take shots about them on the dark web so we don't have to list our names.
Does the
And
dark web have a name? Oh yeah, right. It's X. Good.
but I mean, we literally have lost the ability to value other people, especially when those other people disagree with us.
Yeah.
And we have this illusion, I think, that somehow we're going to be able to create our own fiefdom where everybody agrees with us, and everybody that doesn't is just going to magically float away. And the reality is that doesn't happen.
I think for our part, and I do mean you and I,
Okay.
um, that we're trying to live the example that you're making right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Because as I have said in the past, and I don't make any bones about it, I think neither one of us make any bones about the fact that on most political issues, we're not going to agree.
Yeah.
We're just not. That's who we are. But it does not keep us from being friends. It does not keep us from, doing this together and having a common interest in the people that God's put in our care,
Yeah.
So that, yeah, it's baby steps, right? But it's steps. Um, so we could, what are we in? Like maybe 10 minutes or so. What else do we want to mention about this? Uh, you talked about superficial relationships. There's no depth in these guys. They're about the money and themselves. And literally even not their families, just themselves.
Yeah.
Not even really their group of friends. This group of friends, what do they call themselves? The Brewsters, I think.
Yeah.
Brew Crew or something like that. But they're not even really friends. I think they are friendly just because they're rich,
Yeah.
you know. And because of their focus on their wealth, the only people they can relate to even a little bit are people like themselves.
Well, I think one image of the movie or scene of the movie that I thought was really powerful, where they're all sitting there scrolling through their phones, and you just see disaster after disaster,
Hmm.
and I think to myself how often we all get trapped in the craziness of this, right?
The doom scroll. Yeah.
You know, where we don't think about, okay, how could I actually do something to make a difference? And and what's powerful is these guys could make a huge difference. But instead of making a difference, instead of taking action, they're just sitting there scrolling through the chaos.
Yeah.
And I think what's important for Christians to remember is we're called to act. We're called to do something, to live.
Mm.
Literally, the first Christians called themselves the members of the way. It was the idea that they were called to live a certain way of life, take action in their world and in their communities. And so, what I would encourage you to think about is the next time you're doom scrolling, stop and think about how you can do something to make a difference.
Yeah. 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 And that's, I think, probably a good point for us to wrap this up. It's a very interesting film. I wouldn't necessarily call it a great film. I don't think it's great cinema or anything like that, but um, it ought to make you think a little.
Mhm.
It is, to be honest, we'll go back to to its beginning. Not a film I want my kids to watch necessarily.
No, not without
Um,
not without interaction about it. No.
Yeah, exactly. There's some questionable stuff in there, a little violence sprinkled in, particularly the stuff on the phones, and
Yeah.
on the TV screens. Um, an attempt at offing one of the crew during this.
Yeah.
It's a very irreverent film. Let's leave it at that. So for next week, whether Evan is with us or not, we are going to talk about Sinners, which I think is available as a buy or a rental on Prime
Yes.
right now.
Yes.
Um, I think you may still find it in some theaters if you go that route, folks.
Yeah.
Very interesting film. Be aware, we said this before as well. It's R-rated for good reason.
Has a lot of adult content. Yes.
Yeah, a lot of it. Well, when you say adult content, let's be fair. It's not X-rated,
No, no, it's not.
but it is R-rated,
Yes.
and it earned the rating. So, but that's what we'll be talking about next week is Sinners. Um, until next week, friends. Thanks for watching. We'll see you all again next week. Bye. Friends, thank you again for watching the Finding God in the Dark podcast. If you're finding these discussions helpful or meaningful in your Christian walk, then we'd invite you to go ahead and subscribe down below. Get more of this content. We publish every Friday morning at 10 a.m. And we're so glad that you can be with us and enjoy these discussions as well. Take care and God bless. Bye now.